Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is come over to the driver's side strut tower, and we're going to start removing this negative terminal. You're going to find that there's two wires that are on this, and each of them is held down by their own nut. I'll use a 15 millimeter with my stubby ratchet. We'll go ahead and remove this. Set that nut aside, grab onto that wire, remove it from there. Give it a little look. You just want to inspect it and make sure it doesn't look like it's broken or damaged in any way. After that, just go ahead and set it aside so it's making no contact with the body whatsoever. After that, go ahead and remove this 15 millimeter nut and do the exact same thing to the other wire. Once again, making sure that we're making no contact with the body. Now from underneath the vehicle, we're going to carefully put something underneath the transmission. We're only going to jack it up to the point that it's holding it, but not necessarily lifting it. After that, we're going to make our way right over to this 15 millimeter headed bolt so we can remove the through bolt that holds the engine mount to this piece here. Now we're going to continue on by removing this entire cross member right here. To remove it, we're going to come right up front with an 18 millimeter to remove both of these bolts. Now let's follow that to where it connects onto the subframe. We're going to continue on by removing the four 16 millimeter headed bolts. Make sure you hold that bar. Let's remove this last bolt. Set this aside. Now that we have that out of the way, the next thing we're going to do is come right up here to the oxygen sensor connector. Go ahead and disconnect that, and then we're going to start removing the O2 sensor from the exhaust. To remove this, I'm going to go ahead and squeeze on the tab and then separate the two. Inspect that. This looks good. We'll set it aside. Now we're going to use an O2 sensor socket to start removing it. You're going to notice that it has a slot through it for the wire. Inspect it, set it aside. Now we can start getting this bracket out of here. You're going to find three mounting bolts for this. There's one located right here. We'll use a 16 millimeter to remove this. Now let's do the 16 millimeter headed bolt right up in this area here. This bolt goes right through this bracket and goes right into the starter. There's that bolt. Let's continue on to this last one right here. As we get it loose, this is going to start wiggling around, so make sure you hold on to it so it doesn't fall and hurt you. All right, that's a nice long bolt. We can go ahead and remove this bracket at the same time. Now that we have the bracket out of the way, let's continue on to the wiring for this. Looking at this wire right here, you can tell that the connector has a red tab on it, and that red tab is a lock. The first thing that we need to do is gently pry that away from the connector itself. Should unlock. Now at this point it's unlocked. I'm going to go ahead and grab onto the tab, which is right where my index finger is. Squeeze that down, remove the wiring. Inspect your wiring, make sure it's still in good condition. If you see any funny colors, it's corrosion. That looks fine. Now let's continue up to the main wire to this. Go ahead and remove that. We'll use a 13 millimeter to remove this. All right, got that nut off of there. Now we'll go ahead and grab the wire, remove that. Inspect it. We're going to want to make sure that we clean this up, but we'll set that aside for now. Now we're going to continue on to removing this wire from the starter / transmission right up here. This bolt goes right through and it goes into the starter. Let's use our 15 millimeter for this. Let's get that off of there. Remove that bolt, inspect that ground wire, make sure it looks like it's in good condition. We'll set that aside, we can clean it up later as well. Now at this point, we only have one bolt left holding this starter to the engine. I'm gonna go ahead and use my 15mm. We'll start removing this bolt. I'm probably gonna have to switch to my wrench. Now let's just go ahead and hold on to that starter. I'm gonna carefully use a pry bar and gently start prying on this, essentially just to separate it. After that, we can grab onto it and remove it from the vehicle. There's our starter, and make sure you reuse this shim. Now before we can go ahead and install our starter, let's clean up this shim area. You wanna make sure it's clean and free of any debris where the starter's gonna be up against, so go ahead and clean up both sides of this. Once the shim's clean, go ahead and clean up the engine where it's gonna mount to as well. Once the engine's clean, go ahead and clean up the terminals on both of your wires. All right, now we can get ready to install our shim and our new starter. Take a look at the shim though. You wanna look for the area that says up. You can see it right where my index finger is. We're gonna make sure we have that facing up and towards us, essentially away from where the transmission is. We'll go ahead and get this on the starter. It should want to mount up with all three of the mounting ears right here. Now we can go ahead and put this into position. All right, once you have them both up there, go ahead and take that mounting bolt, we'll get it in. Now that we have both of those two mounting bolts started in, we're gonna go ahead and bottom these out. Once they're bottomed out, torque each of these to 40 foot-pounds. All right, do the same to the other. Now we can start dealing with the wiring. I'm gonna go ahead and remove my nut from this area. Grab onto that electrical wire, slide it into position. Reinstall the nut and snug it up. Once that wire's tight, let's continue on to this one. Don't forget about that red locking tab. Once you slide this in, press this all the way in to lock it. Press that in, listen for a click, give it a tug to make sure it's secure, lock it down. Now it's gonna be time to get ready to install the bracket. I'm gonna take this long bolt, slide it right in through there for now. We can get this in position. Start the bolt in the hole here. Once it's started in, we're gonna leave this nice and loose so we can still wobble this bracket around. We're gonna start in the other mounting bolts for this. Once all of them are started, we can snug them up. Now we're gonna put in this mounting bolt. This is up along the top hole here, right next to where your transmission dipstick is. Wiggle this around, get it lined up. Make sure it starts in a few good threads. Now we can also start this one in. Okay, so now I have all three of my mounting bolts started. We're gonna have to continue on by snugging each of these up, and then once we have them all snugged, we're gonna have to torque these to 35 foot-pounds in a very specific order. We'll start right up here at the top bolt. We'll get this one bottomed out. Then the second bolt that we're gonna work on is this one, the forward bolt. And then lastly, this one right over here. Now we can torque these in that specific order to 35 foot-pounds. There's that one. Now it's time to reinstall our downstream O2 sensor. I always use a little bit of copper never sees just on the threads, but I never try to get anything on any of the sensing unit. Go ahead and put this in there by hand, being very careful not to cross-thread it into your pipe. Once it's bottomed out, go ahead and snug it. Now we can plug that in. Get In position, squeeze it together, listen for a click. Give it a tug, make sure it's secure, and make sure the wire isn't anywhere near the fans. Now we can get ready to install our cross member. We're gonna grab 3 of our bolts, the 2 longest bolts that go in the front, and we're gonna grab the smallest bolt that we had that goes in the rear. What you might notice when you took this down is some of your rubber bushings from the front area fell off. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the flat area of the bushing, I'm gonna bring it right up against the longest bolt, up against the washer. You can see I have the little bezel here. We'll do the same for both of those forward bolts. Now we can get ready to get this up here. Grab our bolts with those bushings. Get them right up on there. Those are both started. Let's do the far rear bolt. Once everything's started, you can carefully let this down. Should stay in place. Go ahead and grab onto your other 3 bolts. Start all of these in as well. Once we have all of our mounting bolts started, go ahead and snug them up. Let's use our 16mm to tighten up these rearward bolts. $18mm up here. Now we can install our through bolt for this mount. Let's go ahead and slide it right through there. If it doesn't feel like it wants to pull through, more than likely it needs to be lined up. If that's the case, just either raise or lower your engine as needed with your jack. Now we can go ahead and torque these forward bolts to 40 foot-pounds. Let's torque the rear bolts to 37 foot-pounds. Let's torque this through bolt to 35 foot-pounds. Remove your support. All right, now let's make our way back up into the engine compartment. We're gonna get ready to reattach our negative battery terminals. Now for the wires, once again, you're gonna wanna make sure you clean up the terminal ends. Both sides of them, make sure they're clean and free of any corrosion or dirt or debris. After that, let's go ahead and take this single wire here. We're gonna put it right up against the body of the vehicle. Now we've got our 2 mounting nuts. I'm gonna use the smaller of the mounting nuts. We'll put that right on there and we'll snug it up. Let's hold that sideways, tighten it up. Right there is bottomed out, just take it a little bit more. Double check it to make sure it's completely secured up against the body of the vehicle. Now let's reattach this wire as well. You wanna make sure that one's clean. Take that last nut, we'll put it on here and snug that up. Okay, it's bottomed out. Double check both of those wires to make sure they're secure. Okay friends, we got our starter back in there. What's left to do now? Now of course you're going to want to go ahead and start up the vehicle. Make sure it starts. Listen for any funny noises and also make sure you don't have a check engine light from removing that O2 sensor. Aside from that, take it for a road test. Thanks for watching.